Before we begin, no, it's not the katana. But having said that, it's also not the longsword. It's a complex discussion and we've got a lot to talk about, so let's get into it.
Shadowversity.
Greetings, I am Shad, and if you've been watching my content lately, there's been a topic that has caused me to start thinking about weapons for self-defense lately, and it sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole. Think about, what are the best weapons for self-defense? And one of the videos I've been really enjoying lately, or YouTube channels, is a YouTube channel called Hard to Hurt with Icy Mike. And it's a great YouTube channel where he discusses practical self-defense in the modern day. One thing that I really appreciate about this YouTube channel is that everything he says comes with good logic behind it and insight. Doesn't mean that I've agreed with everything. There's actually one or two things that I disagree. But at least every time he puts forward an argument, he actually has some really insightful things to mention. One of the really interesting things that I've really appreciated is how he's extolled the virtues and utility of a flashlight. You wouldn't be able to see in the sun. As a self-defense tool. One of Mike's standards, which I think is really great to also acknowledge, is that he feels his requirement for a self-defense weapon is a weapon that should be able to harm a person when they try and block with their hands. Totally agree. For me, I want something more in a self-defense weapons that I would consider, yes, this is a good one. I would class this as a good one. And my additional standard is that I would want the self-defense weapon to be able to incapacitate the opponent in multiple ways, so have versatility to be able to do this, not just in one single attack that has to land in one area. With that standard, that I feel a good self-defense weapon should be able to fully incapacitate someone with a good solid strike in multiple areas. Well, a large bladed tool to hold up their hands, a good solid strike, you can strike from multiple areas, you get thrusting. Thrusting is an interesting one when it comes to machetes. We'll talk about that a bit more. But the point is, this is why the sword is still actually a great self-defense weapon, because it has that capacity. Someone gets a solid cut on the arm, especially if you're dealing with a sword that can do serious damage and has the potential to chop off an arm. Well, you're dealing with a serious weapon that has some very powerful stopping power. So that's why the sword is still a viable pick when you look at and consider many weapons. There is actually another standard that Mike points out, and I thought about it a lot, and I actually agree with him, is that he feels that the self-defense weapon should be one-handed. This is going to impact the type of sword that would be the best one for self-defense. Now, before we go into, two-handed, one-handed, things like that, in terms of what's available in the types of all the swords that you could look at, why is a one-handed weapon better? And for me, when I consider it, and this is why I agree, having a free hand is, depending on who you're facing, and this is also about modern contexts versus other contexts. This might not apply in other contexts where you're fighting people with weapons similar, talking about blades and swords and stuff, but we're not. A hand is a great distancing tool and a great deflecting tool, because to get the full power out of a sword, you do want distance to be able to get a full strike in, full powered strike. And so even when they rush you and they get close, you could push back, strike, and deflect. And so having a free hand is also great, because it also means you could use other weapons or tools to help out, still get the distance that you want, and you get full versatility as well. So I completely agree with Mike in that standard. I think that's a really great insight. And with that insight, we can start to consider, okay, we have some good parameters to start look at what swords are able to fulfill the purposes that we're looking at to the best ability. The types of swords that people default to mostly when they look at a bladed object for self-defense are machetes. Surprisingly, they're actually really good for reasons that I'm going to explain in this video. But before we get there, we need to talk about the sponsor of this video, and we need a good segue. That's a good segue.
What about defending your wrecked? Never mind, actually.
I got one. We are talking about weapons for self-defense, but what about defending your diet? That's awful. That one's really bad. Machetes are really good choppers. Do you know where else you need to chop things? When you're cooking. That's also really bad. Yeah. But we're sticking with it. We're committed now. Machetes chop stuff, and HelloFresh you chop stuff too, and it's good food. It is actually. I mention this a lot. I was a customer of HelloFresh before they sponsored me, and so I can give it a very honest recommendation. But because we're committed to it, we're going to do it. We're going to make our HelloFresh with these choppy machetes. This one, I reckon this one will do great. This could definitely cut a carrot. In fact, if it can't cut a carrot, it'd be really hard for a sword not to be able to cut a carrot. They're pretty soft. You know what really annoys me? I'm sorry, this is a pet peeve, I'm just saying it, okay? When people want to test weapons, and then they test them on the softest, weakest targets like cantaloupes and watermelons and things. Are you kidding? Come on! I reckon a coconut, that's not a bad one. Because like this sword is completely blunt, right? It's a training one. This could cut a watermelon in two. That's it. We're cutting a watermelon just to show you. I'm gonna get the guys to go and buy a watermelon, and just like a blunt sword. So stop cutting weak crap to say how great weapons are. No, get proper tucks. Anyway, HelloFresh. We're gonna be cooking some HelloFresh, as I mentioned, with machetes. This will be fun to see how well that one, because that one sucks. HelloFresh is really good, and if you've been on the fence about trying it out, here is a great deal that they're offering. All you have to do is go to hellofresh.com and use code Shadowversity16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. Free meals right there, so why not stay in and have fun cooking together with a significant other perhaps? Why not make the meal as a special gift for that significant other? It's a great way to show them how much you care, especially one that comes with vanilla cheesecake. It's also really healthy with fit and wholesome recipes low in calories and carbs. You can indulge in delicious meals without the worries. And there are so many recipes to choose from each week, and it really does help you break out of all the recipes that you just default to again and again. That was very much what I found in my own family. We would just default to the same things again and again. HelloFresh really did open up our options. Oz! Bowl! Microwave! Go! Where'd I put it? You are autistic.
Also, they offer a wide variety of quick and easy recipes, including 20-minute meals, easy cleanup, and low prep options. With their pre-proportioned ingredients, that means there's less prep time for you and less wasted food. HelloFresh is great and delicious. Just have a look at the food that we're making right here, and you can dive in right now, easier than ever, with this great deal. Just go to hellofresh.com and use code Shadowversity16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts.
Let's give this a go, hey?
Delicious.
Yeah, very good.
Hey,
very
Shad.
good.
Seriously, thank you for cooking all this.
You're welcome, Oz. Because I definitely cooked everything myself.
Worked so hard. I can feel the love.
Yeah.
Slaving away here in the hot sun, mashing with your non-mashing arm. Appreciate it.
Free food. What do you got to lose? And now here's some free advice that I'm not going to say is absolutely correct. It's just my opinion, but I'm going to share the reasons why. All right, yes, best sword for modern day self-defense. We're talking about the machete, and yes, machete's really good for reasons that we're going to talk about. It's not the best though. I actually think there is a type of sword that excels far beyond just general machetes. Machetes actually have problems. Now you might be thinking, obviously, Shad, there are heaps of swords better than the machete, and if you want to look at the best sword for self-defense, just look to history, and if you wanted to try and find which weapon was the king of personal self-defense, yet it was the sword, okay? The sword excelled on the battlefield historically, and there are many different designs types designed for achieve or do certain things better than other designs. There's so much diversity in swords. But when we look historically, when swords really used a lot in self-defense, there are a lot of cultures we can look at because the sword existed in multiple cultures. The main point of reference we're going to be looking at is medieval / Renaissance European, because not only because it's my area of expertise and I have the most information and knowledge to draw upon, but also in terms of the historical cultures in the world, medieval Europe, I'm not kidding, like that was sword central for the world. Like if you wanted to find the place where swords were used more prominently than nearly any other culture and historical period, you look there. In other cultures, swords existed, but there were also restrictions placed in terms of who could use them. Not saying there weren't restrictions in the medieval period, but it was a different situation because it was more decentralized. If you want more information on that, check out my video on sword laws of the medieval period. So then, if we look at history, what were the most popular types of swords used for self-defense? And maybe we can get some insight to that, to the ultimate answer of the best sword for modern day self-defense. Now, there's a lot of diversity in swords throughout history. This here is fills in what is kind of more commonly called the Great Sword of War or War Sword. It's not necessarily a great sword, that's an even larger category. These swords are meant for battlefields, all right? Yeah, if you had one in a civilian scuffle and you could use it for self-defense, there is a general rule that can't be taken too much out of context of bigger can usually be better with swords, but then it can get too far. But you would have an advantage using this against someone using this, all right? Reach is going to be an important topic in this discussion that we're going to dive into, because this is obviously still better if you're just like thinking about one-on-one duel outside of the specific context that they use than say a Gladius, which is a shorter sword. But a Gladius is great when you combine it with a shield, so there's context. But if we're just looking at self-defense, what weapons do you have? Reach is a very important one. But there's a reason why people didn't carry battlefield weapons for self-defense, and it is again that thing, they're really big. This is on the very limit of wearability. And even though you can, it's still like it almost hits the ground and stuff. And so no, when we're looking at the weapons for swords, for self-defense in the historical, medieval and early Renaissance period, it generally defaulted to three more popular types with, of course, exceptions outside of it. The first really popular type is, of course, the one-handed sword. This could also be substituted with, say, a single-edged one, like a falchion or a messer. But generally, we'll look at the classic one-handed medieval sword, which is called the arming sword. This wasn't really the thing that became hugely, it was common and really popular, but you do have an interesting thing, you have a free hand. And you could use that in, if you wouldn't want to present your arm to another person using a sword, you could get it chopped off, but it can still be used for defense to slap aside, so sometimes you would keep your hand a bit forward like this in certain styles. But the thing that became really popular with the one-handed sword was this, the buckler. Sword and buckler, very popular combination for self-defense. Why? Because this is a shield you can wear. Larger shields are very awkward, this can be quite big, even smaller heater shields can be quite cumbersome just carrying around. But the buckler is the shield that you can carry, great defensive tool, you can present it forward, and that was one of the more popular combos. The other very popular type of sword, long sword. Why? Reach, more leverage in cuts, so striking. In terms of which has the edge, long sword over sword and buckler, that's actually up to debate, because with two tools, like two items, there's a lot you can do. It gives you a lot of versatility, and some might say that gives you more advantages over the long sword's reach and leverage, which is more than sword and buckler. It's so close, it's hard, you can't really call it, and it falls down to whichever one you're more skilled in. I'm better with longsword, so even hypothetically, if we were to say sword and buckler was better than longsword, even by a little bit, what I'm not saying it is, this is hypothetically, even if it was that, I would still pick a longsword because I'm just better with it than sword and buckler, and I would have a better chance of succeeding with it. In terms of reach being really important, we come to a very special sword in terms of this discussion of swords for self-defense. And you might even consider this was the king's sword for self-defense historically. So is this going to be the king's sword for modern day self-defense with a sword? Well, we'll get to that. What we're talking about is the rapier. The rapier is a highly specialized sword. It was used in the battlefield, but one area where it really excels in is in dueling. Personal dueling, okay? And the rapier is a vicious sword, and you do not need much force to do lethal damage with a rapier. It is viciously lethal. Don't worry, this is a practice one, right? But seriously, rapier is a phenomenal sword, and in terms of reach, have a look at the reach. It's actually a little bit longer than the long sword, and it's one-handed. And because it's one-handed, you can actually lean forward and get more range in a one-handed sword than you can in two. And so this sword was made in one way, because it was made for it to do a lot of things, but in one way it was made to be able to outreach many other weapons. And if you can reach your opponent and they can't reach you, the great thing about swords, this is why swords are so much better than sticks, for instance, right? Yes, sticks, is that you do not need a lot of force to do lethal damage with a sword. Whereas to do lethal damage with something like a stick, you need to put in a lot of it. If I just did the same amount of force, it's not going to hurt anyone. You need to put in a lot of effort to do lethal damage with a stick versus very minimal effort to do lethal damage with a sword. They are highly efficient lethal tools. And so therefore, if you can just touch them and they can't touch you, and then little effort, dead, you're alive. Again, reach is really, really significant. And it comes into the reason why so many of these swords are designed the way they are, and why each one of them, in my opinion, is not a good pick for modern day self-defense. Just like, I have the Vector Corbin here to show like battlefield weapons are insane, and I forgot to pick it up when I was talking about, I just picked up the big long sword, but just because the Vector Corbin is so cool, I'm picking it up. Look at this friggin' weapon, okay? Holy crap. Yeah, of course you'd want a Vector Corbin sort of, but there is such an important thing, a caveat when it comes to self-defense weapons, and it's the convenience to wear. Because a self-defense weapon is just in case you get into trouble. And more often than not, 99, even 0.9 or whatever % of the time that you have that weapon, you're not going to use it. And for most self-defense weapons that people ever have used, they probably never use them. I'm not saying, you know, engagements couldn't be uncommon, but I've carried, you know, self-defense tools in many instances of my life, and to this point, hopefully it'll stay that way. I've never had to use them in real combat. I'll say I've gotten in fights, but I didn't have any tools to assist in those fights. It's a more complex discussion for self-defense weapons in Australia, and so maybe I'll do a video on what I think would be the best self-defense weapon for areas that have more restrictions, like Australia. Because they can't be weapons, but tools. Anyway, it's a whole nother video. Going back to the historical weapons, right? Each of these swords are in part designed to fight other weapons, because it was very common for people to wear swords for self-defense. So therefore, if it's going to be likely, if you're going to be attacked by someone, waylaid, that they're going to have a significant kind of weapon, you want the weapon that gives you best chances to combat them. Therefore, you don't want to be outreached by their weapon, so you want something of decent enough length. And even if your one is shorter, if you have a tool that can help you block and close the distance, okay, all these things are in mind with the reality of the context that they existed in, and it's that weapons were common and people use them a lot. So these are all very optimized for weapon-based combat, and this can be against, you know, maces, hammers, but more commonly other swords. And like I said, when I was talking about the rapier is such a specialized design to fight many other weapons, especially other swords, outreach them. It's an incredibly sophisticated sword. So the question is then, though, is that the modern context? When you get waylaid by someone, is it likely you're going to be facing someone with a long sword? There are times when someone goes crazy and picks up a big medieval sword and does an attack in a, you know, urban setting, all right? But I think we can all agree, no. The most common types of weapons that you will face in a modern setting are, look, yes, guns. The clip fell out, Oz!
Oh, I didn't touch it.
Gosh, so dangerous. This fake toy gun could have gone off and someone could have been hurt. Treat it with respect. Oh, look, yes, guns. Yeah, guns, and sword against gun, obviously not a good matchup. And if you're in a situation that you can't run away, there's a but. I mean, having a sword is better than nothing, and I think having a sword would be better than having a smaller knife or something. It has a higher chance of incapacitating an opponent. I'm not saying take on someone with a gun, all right? I'm saying if there was like a no retreat scenario, at least a sword would be better than nothing. But the other weapons that you're likely to face in a modern setting, very commonly, are knives. Very common for people to wear knives. And unarmed. Attacking you without a weapon, something breaks out, and if you get attacked by an unarmed opponent, having a sword gives you a massive opponent. In fact, that sword might be enough to just cease the conflict right there because it's so intimidating and threatening. They know they're going to get cut up, potentially killed if they attack you with it. Could end the conflict right there. So a deterrent by display of force is a real thing. I mean, a lot of serious, confrontations often end when someone simply shows that they're armed with a gun and they're like, oh, I'm not even going near that. It's amazing how many conflict scenarios actually ended or avoided by the fact someone has a weapon. You might think that's counterintuitive because but no, weapons can actually de-escalate situations at times. Not every time, of course. All right, so those are situations. Now look, in all these situations, excluding the gun, but all these other weapons, the sword gives you a profoundly significant advantage. And the question is then, what type of sword would be good against these situations? One of the first things to consider in terms of this is reach. You want a weapon that will have higher chances to outreach the most common types of weapons you'll be faced with. And if you're going to be faced with things like, more often, knives, unarmed, and things like that, something as long as a longsword will be very effective. I'm not saying it wouldn't, but it also is a little bit of overkill because a shorter weapon will outreach very well these other types of weapons, but it would also be more convenient. You see, one of the problems with a sword like this in the modern day is its size and how difficult it is to carry, and there's an unfortunate reality to the modern day. I wish it wasn't the case, but it is. Swords are not as socially, legally, or commonly accepted in modern day to be seen wearing. I wish it was. Swords are awesome, especially imagine just a cool sword right there. But no. And so having a sword that can be concealed to avoid issues like that, I'm not endorsing people, conceal illegal weapons and things like that. That is not, I feel, use the right tools that are legal in wherever place. But if it is legal, okay, even in those situations, sword? Having it somewhat concealable, but just also convenience to wear, because we're getting in and out of cars a lot and things like that. Something as big as this is really awkward, will get in the way a lot, and that's a problem. So you want it to be able to outreach most of the weapons, so long enough to outreach the weapons, but short enough to be worn easily, concealably, and we also want it one-handed. So already, we are coming to one of the weapons we started with in this discussion. The Machete fills those criteria really well. The other good thing about Machete is that they do fall in that optimal range. They will outrange a lot of weapons that you would fight with, more commonly, like knives and people being unarmed. I'd kind of want a bit longer than this, but this is certainly adequate. Very, versatile in one hand. And one of the things that I think is important in terms of the right size for this modern day self-defense weapon is that it's still very versatile. Like, you can strike really well when someone is grappling you close up. Like with this, you could absolutely do crazy lethal strikes, whereas with a much longer sword, and look, this is two-handed, like very hard to do that in such a close situation.
That's not to say you can't use long swords or other similar length swords in close range. You absolutely can. It is just that with shorter swords, it's easier, of course.
And you want them to be able to avoid being grappled. This is why machetes are already better than sticks, because they have an edge. But we're going to come to the grappling, disarming thing, because they could try and grab the back end of the machete. But okay, so optimal length. Like, you can do some seriously lethal stuff really close range with machete. So have we come all around in a circle? We come back to the machete being better than even the historical swords of self-defense in a modern context? I would say yes, but didn't I say that the machete isn't the best pick? I did. Machete is still great, and for the reasons that we explained, even better than the more popular historical choices. But there's a couple of problems with a machete. you have to remember that a machete, first and foremost, is actually a tool, you know. This one I've used for cutting scrub brush, you know, tea tree specifically on my property, heaps. It's a beastie cutter, very deadly, but it does have a severe weakness and limitation. One is that their inability to thrust well. In fact, a lot of machetes have a rounded tip and can't thrust at all, but even this is very poor at thrusting. I got in then, okay, and you could do some very deadly thrusts with it, but it's not optimized. Or having a point off the center line makes thrusting more problematic. In most cases, you still can do it. It just is a more inefficient transferal force. And there's another really big question in regards to if you're going to be using a machete-like sword for self-defense, why single-edged? Now, there are historical swords that were single-edged, of course, and they get great benefits out of it, and there's a reason why they were made that way. A machete takes advantage of nearly none of that. It's a complex thing. You can check out some of my reasons in the biggest problems with the katana, but I actually talk about a lot of the katana's virtues. And one of the big advantages of having single edge is that you can get a more narrow, more finer, like a smaller edge angle, and not lose thickness in the spine and maintain rigidity, which makes the sword forgiving in the cut, and those are some really significant advantages. These machetes, they don't take advantage of that at all. You can put an edge on the backs of these blades, and with only the slightest loss of weight, they would still cut and be just as effective. In fact, they'll be more effective. And so, double-edged is actually gives you more options in ways to attack. There's another huge advantage if you had a double-edged, blade over a regular machete. It goes back to that grappling thing. People were already kind of reluctant to, would be reluctant to grapple a machete, but they can try it because of the back edge. If you had another edge on there, grappling a sword like that, it can be done. It's very dangerous, and in a lot of situations would give the advantage to you, because when you pull it, try and yank it out, you will be cutting them, damaging them, and help, hopefully, putting an end to the conflict. I'm not saying it always would, but when someone receives devastating injury, that could end it right there, and they're like, I'm out. And if they were dumb enough to try and grab a double-edged sword, the injury that they get is kind of their fault, isn't it? So, we've come to an interesting conclusion. Something of a machete's size, this is a really crap one. This is a great one. Something of a machete's size, but double-edged, straight, with the one thing that machete is great is the weight concentration, the cutting capacity. This is again why I said the machete is a good pick. It's not the best pick. But do you know this machete would cut vastly better than this longer sword? They're about similar weights, actually. So it's all about weight concentration and edge profile for cutting capacity. And so you can get surprisingly short-bladed objects that can cut insanely well. And well, look, even more. This machete does cut better than this sword. The complex thing about cutting capacity with swords is you don't need overkill. With machetes, you kind of do want them. You want to be able to cut as well as possible to get through wood and things like that. With a sword, you want it to cut enough to kill someone. Anything more, and kill someone reliably in a lot of strikes. Anything over that is overkill, and you could be making a worse sword, because if you wanted to add greater cutting capacity to this, you'd need to increase the weight and make it more awkward, more cumbersome, less versatile. You need a sword to be usable and functional, and just going nuts on the cutting capacity can make it utterly crap as a weapon. So swords need to be good enough at cutting, not overkill. And so even though this sword cuts worse than this machete, because it could outreach an opponent, it can still do enough lethal damage at a longer range, which makes it a generally better weapon in combat, but not for self-defense because it's so large, for all the reasons that we talked about. The thing is, with machete, you can get such devastating cutting capacity in a double-bladed sword just as much. It's not about profile, it's about weight distribution and edge geometry. And so the interesting thing, when we consider all these things that we talked about in this video, finally coming to the conclusion, thanks for sticking with me, there is a sword type, sword profile that fills all the criteria that we wanted. And there are many examples in the medieval period, but there's a more popular and commonly known sword type that also fills it, and because it's more popular, you'll be aware of it. That's why I'm going to pick this one as the point of reference. It's the Gladius, which is actually a Roman weapon. People outside of Romans use it as well. The Gladius is a devastating cutting beast. Point, like, gosh, holy crap, that is insanely effective. Like, in terms of amount of effort you need to perform a lethal attack, do you see this? I mean, it's insane. Like, swords are deadly force multipliers. That's why they're so much better, insanely better than nunchucks and yes, and they're so much better than sticks. You require such little force to do lethal damage. But remember how great this is? Like, look how much force I'm pushing in. I'm nearly knocking them over, and it's not penetrating. Versus something that has a tip that's a bit more acute, but more in line, directly in line with the point of leverage and point of thrust, and bang, goes right in just like that. So this is why having an aligned tip is so important, because like that, it's like me trying to thrust with this like that, because of the tip being off-centered. And if I really wanted to get it in, I need to angle it like that, and now it goes in. But you see how more awkward trying to thrust with a off-centered tip versus centered one? And with it being double-edged, all right, you can strike with the back edge, get far more versatility, and its cutting capacity is insane. Like, the Gladius is actually a surprisingly heavy sword for its size. It's actually heavier than this. This one looks bigger, but this is lighter than this. There we go. Honestly, a Gladius or Gladius type sword is my pick for the best sword for modern day self-defense. And with that in mind, I decided to go online to have a look at what was available online, what types of swords you could get online that would fill all the requirements and probably be a bit easier to wear. Because there are some things that you don't need in terms of this more historically accurate Gladius. You don't need such a bulbous hilt. Something that we've already kind of acknowledged, because historical swords are made to combat other swords in a lot of ways, not exclusively. Crossguards protect you against a lot of incoming strikes from other swords. You don't need a crossguard with a modern day self-defense weapon. Gladius kind of has that, but it's bulbous crossguard. It's a bit, so, like I said, I went online, called to Athena, and these were the ones that I found. There are actually other swords that I would have ordered, but they're out of stock. So out of the ones that were in stock, these were the ones I found. Two kind of modern, more modern-ish Gladius, right? And then, honestly, I'd like something with a bit more reach, and so I found these two interesting swords. And they've been out in the sun, and they're really, the handles are really hot. They're like burning up in this heat. I have to use this. And so I was just interested in what would be the best ones that were available to me at the time. And I was interested in getting ones that were a little bit longer. It's like the hot potato is really hot. So I was interested to see if I could get one that was a little bit longer that would give you even more leverage in the cut, okay? Could still be used in close, like you can still, it's more awkward, but that tip, that is vicious. Look at that. That's crazy. This is really hot handle. Okay. And honestly, these are not bad. Surprisingly, like this one has a bit too much weight. It's just a little overweight for my preferences. But I like the fact that you have the option to go two-handed. So if you, like, again, because this might be the optimal one. Like, it's funny, in terms of the shorter, more Gladius-like ones, and I like Zombie Go Boom's channel, good guys, it's too heavy though. This is surprisingly heavy. This one is, who makes this one? United Cutlery, was it United Cutlery? Yes, the United Cutlery Combat Commander Gladius sword. And wow, the weight in this is just phenomenal. Like you get, really, really good. Really versatile, but in terms of its cutting capacity, gosh, I could just feel it in the weight. This really, really good and far more versatile in the hand. This is actually one of the better ones out of all the modern day swords I picked. These longer versions, they're made by the same company. I forget which one. We might just put it up in writing under here. This one is better in the hand because it has more counterbalance. It has a full tang, and because there's more weight behind the hand, there's better control. So the question for me, because I really do like this one, honestly, it's a little too much on the heavy side, but it is, which one would work better for modern day self-defense? This one or this one? I think it'll come down to personal preference. They can both do all the things that you'd want a modern day self-defense sword to do. I think the big difference, and by the way, sorry for any background noise. We have neighbors, just got to deal with it. One of the things that you want to consider really as to help for you to decide, I think, which type of sword, I'm not saying these ones specifically, but ones like this that are giving you all the things that you'd want, okay, in modern day self-defense for a sword, is probably how easy they are to wear or even conceal. This one is difficult, probably too much, honestly, under a jacket or something like this. This would be harder to do. This is difficult, but much easier. You could get it, this is concealable. All right? Down, I don't know, look at a, like, even like that, it's pretty darn good if I had like a jacket. And so, the convenience of this United Cutlery Gladius is great. Its weight is brilliant, and at the moment, it's probably my #1 pick, actually, for what I could find available. Toss up with this one, but still, because I do like the reach of that one, but because you can wear this more easily, and if we compare it, all right, it's actually a tiny bit longer than the classic, the default. Everyone thinks this is so cool. Look at it. They can be great cutters, I'm not saying, I feel that they see them everywhere. But honestly, this modern day kind of tactical design Gladius is a vastly better pick in my opinion. Vastly, all right, maybe I'm over exaggerating, I do that for hyperbole, but it is much better. I do feel it is much better than the kind of default sword people pick when they think of modern day self-defense. They always go to the machetes when sword design and sword diversity and all their designs, there's so many to consider, all right? When considering them all, this hits so many of the points that you want really, really well. Great in close combat, one-handed, so if you want, you could use Mike's suggestion of like a flashlight, blind your opponent, and if they really get committed, and can it incapacitate someone in a single strike? I definitely feel it could. I reckon this could have with a good enough strike, this could take off someone's hand, arm even, with a strong enough on. But it's one thing that it really is, like I've emphasized already, that a lot of machetes are very poor at. Like even this, look at how much force I'm needing to put in to just penetrate this thick rubber compared. It's like night and day, okay? And thrusts are devastatingly lethal, all right? Especially when you're close like this, it's very hard to, you can try and do your slashes, but when someone has grappled you and you're really trying to get you, look at that! Look at that! Oh my goodness! That would end it right there. Call an ambulance. Like, seriously. So yeah, I think you can see why this modern day tactical Gladius, and even, other ones that we've looked at, are better picks. There we go. The best sword for modern day self-defense is a Gladius-like sword. And I like how optimized it is, right? No need for a crossguard, no need for a bulky hilt or anything like that. It's sleek, it's thin. It's a good, it's a good one. So there we go. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section below, because this is my opinion, and I'd love to hear your opinions. If you think there's a better option, what other sword do you feel would be great for modern day self-defense. I look forward to reading them, and of course I look forward to seeing you in the next video here on Shadiversity. So until that time, farewell.
Ah, but wait, there is more. We have random stuff to cut and bash.
Remember how I was saying that this was like, whenever they're doing cutty stuff, that they do it on really soft targets and it annoys me. And so to show you, like, this is a blunt sword, completely blunt, completely practiced blunt. And against something like this, watch. All right, completely blunt, yet look at how clean of a cut it went through that. So it doesn't prove spit. It's not bad cantaloupe. If you want to do watermelon, everyone does watermelons, but the shop was out of it. I think a coconut is a better test, actually. Okay. Because I don't think this will drop through a coconut because it's so blunt. It actually will probably damage the sword. Swords, when they actually come up against something that can resist their cutting capacity, like they don't dig in, all the force that you are putting into the target, if it can resist, gets put back into this sword, and it'll probably damage it. So I guess I have to, I want to show to you that when you actually are hitting something hard, you actually, then you need a weapon that can perform, all right? And so if I hit somewhere there, it'll probably damage a little more. If I hit down here, it'll have a higher chance of surviving. Maybe it will be able to crack the coconut. If I was going to be generous, I'd hit along the grain, but I'm not. I'm hitting it against the grain to prove a point. So let's get right here. Cracked it open. So I hit right there. Not sure if you can see that, hit right there. So I cracked it open. Honestly, I didn't do full power because I didn't want to hurt the sword too much. Something with a blade on it, that's actually a good cutter. I missed it completely, but look at that. Shave right off, right? Let's do this again. It's the grain, but I think I've already proven the point. That went right in, just like that. So it's a bit better of an example. Because everyone wants to test, just to show point, Oz, get the stick and nunchucks. They say coconut is somewhat analogous, like a proper, coconut, somewhat analogous to a human skull. I don't think it's perfectly analogous, but yeah, I mean, it's somewhat, I think there's an equivalence, like, not a perfect equivalence, some type of approximation. I'm doing this, I know people just want to see it, all right? I actually think the nunchucks will crack open the coconut. By the way, I'm going to be doing a follow-up nunchuck thing to really go into the science of their cutting, power. All right. Let's see, hey? Yeah, see, I thought it would. Because I never said the nunchucks can't hit with power, but if you really think a stick is not going to be able to do that, you're grossly mistaken. All right? Just like that. It actually fully skinned the coconut. Yeah, holy crap, I'm going to have a bite of that. Oh, I don't know about you. That's disgusting. Why is that gross? Did we buy an off coconut? Gosh, I was going to credit the power of the mighty power of the stick, but no, that's feral. Okay, so wasn't the almighty power of the stick that skinned the coconut? It's just slingering. I won't go away. All right, stick coconut. Hey! That friggin' shattered. That one.
Try that one.
Yeah. See. Oh, much better.
Much better?
Actual coconut. That one legitimately shattered into pieces. Stick wins again. Every time. Every bloody time. As to why, stay tuned for a follow-up video. I think I'm going to call it something like the nunchuck counter-offensive, when actually it's going to be a more deep dive analysis of impact versus impulse, scientific stuff. Have I proved my point yet?
With the nunchucks?
No, that wasn't the point. It was about proper targets. That was the point. All right. So I've already busted open a cantaloupe with a blunt sword. It's like people say to try and prove weapons are really powerful, they'll hit a soft target. That was the point. Let's see what nunchucks will do against a cantaloupe. Ah! Oh, this could have been someone's skull. No, it couldn't, because it's a pathetically soft thing. But to prove a point, I won't say this would be someone's skull, because it's like pathetically soft compared to a skull. Just because I know you're going to want to see it, I would want to see it too. What about the pick, the ultimate conclusion? What about that versus a coconut? Well, I think it'll actually do really well. Let's see. I don't want to miss, but that, yeah, okay. Yeah, made short work of the coconut.